Guys, today we got a question from Dan, a friend of mine who is a blue belt, been training for a while, and his question basically is, how do you develop the if this then that mentality? Because he says that during training, he's having trouble doing that. Now, if you're not familiar with that, maybe you're a bit new. In Jiu-Jitsu, what happens is as we develop particular areas of focus, particular levels of competence in a particular area, it becomes our position, our style, if you will say that. When we do that, we then develop this sort of if this then that mentality. It almost looks like a flow chart. So for instance, you do a technique, and if that technique works, great. But if it doesn't work, then we do this technique. And if that technique works, great. And if it doesn't, we do this. It just sort of spreads it like a tree or a map, if you will. And this is one of the things, if you guys get the little free ebook that I have down in the links below about developing your own game plan for a competition or otherwise, I sort of show it like that. I show it like a sort of a flow chart. And so this is what he's wanting to do. He wants to develop that type of thing for his game, but he's having trouble doing it because he says that, in the moments of those fast-paced rolls and everything going on, it just, he doesn't have the ability to do it. He doesn't have the ability to think about what's going on and is not able to sort of remember everything. And so he's wondering, how do you memorize all this stuff? How do you develop this ability? And that's his question. So Dan, let's jump into it. And I'm going to give you a roadmap, if you will, in a second here, to where you can develop this if this then that mentality for any position you want to, any technique you're trying to work on. And it can help you develop some level of relative, almost we're going to say it that way, relative competence or even mastery at some point after years of a particular position or technique, right? So the first things first, before we get into the if this then that stuff, you have to go back a little bit because that's talking about techniques, right? The first thing you want to really focus on is control. Control, if you want to think about it, to me, in my book, my bearded opinion, is top, right? It's the hierarchy of jiu-jitsu. It's first, it's control above all else. When we come into jiu-jitsu, the first thing we're trying to learn how to do is control another human being on the ground or on the feet. Basically, as soon as we lock up with each other, we want to learn how to control them. And a lot of times for us in the beginning, when we come into jiu-jitsu, this is the thing that just opens our eyes because we might be someone like my size who's 200 pounds. You roll with someone who's, 130 pounds and they can control you and your strength and size can't do anything to stop it. And they can do that. It's really cool, right? And so control is very important. That's what we want to focus on first. And so if there is a particular area that you are trying to develop this, if this, then that approach to where you can methodically break someone down or escape or whatever it might be, because this is that idea, that mentality will ring true to pretty much any position you get into. Well, then you have to focus on control. And again, control can mean that we're putting someone in side control and smashing them, or control could even be the bottom of side control where we're defending and we're controlling where our arms are and where our neck is so that we control the available options that they have to submit us with, right? So that's one option, right? Or that's the idea first, is control. You got to focus there first. And this is why I tell anybody who's new to jiu-jitsu, whenever you start, your focus should not be simply executing techniques. It's focus on getting to these positions and being able to hold them for a little while. And then you can focus on options afterwards. And the reason why this is so important, Dan, is if you're going to develop this methodical approach, this approach to break someone down bit by bit with this mentality, you have to have time to do it. You have to be confident that you can hold the position, and you have to be able to do it without panic and rush. If you look at someone, for instance, who has no control of their leg lock positions, but maybe they know how to do a few leg lock submissions, then it becomes this mad dash to the submission and they have to just go after it. If you look at the way people used to apply heel hooks and things like that, years ago, it was very like rushed, almost looked like panicky, spazzy, maybe to a degree. Now with the sort of renaissance that we had with leg locks, people have become much more focused on the positional control and they can break someone down bit by bit reliably and consistently, right? Same idea that we would do from any other position. So we want the control so we have confidence and we have time to think about what's going on, okay? And then that's where we go from there. So first is control. Second, we move from there. Now, once you have control of this position, what do you do to set up those techniques, right? Well, there's two ideas, and I'm going to tell you something, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record because I've talked about them over and over again on the channel, but they're so important. It's the ones that have given me the most bang for my buck. And it's the ones where the students that do this most bang for their buck. Drilling is number one, right? Very simple. You're going to take a movement and you're going to get quality repetitions of that movement over and over and over again so that the feeling of that movement becomes second nature to you. You're developing muscle memory. You're increasing the speed at which you can execute that technique and decreasing the lag in which you tell your body to do the technique and it takes your body the time to do it. So repetitions, it's a good one. And then the other one, which I think is really important, maybe more important, is time and position, situational rolling, situational sparring. So it still surprises me that there's a lot of gyms that don't do this, because I talk to you guys and you tell me this. So let's say, for instance, if we work a position, let's do a parallel real quick. Let's talk about baseball. Okay, I'm not a big baseball fan, but I'm going to assume this. I played it when I was a kid. Let's say that you're good everywhere, Dan. You play baseball and you're good at every position in the game, and you can catch balls, you can throw balls, you can do all this different stuff. But you can't hit a ball with your bat to save your life. If your coach is trying to make you a better player, do you think they're going to tell you to go out in the outfield and catch fly balls? Probably not. They're probably going to put you there either on the plate to hit the ball against a pitcher, or maybe put you in the batting cages to get you practice in that area, to build you up, if that's what they're trying to do, right? Well, similarly, what ends up happening a lot of times at gyms, apparently, from what I gather, is that, and again, I do this to some degree, but basically people will go into the gym, they'll learn some techniques, and then they just full roll. They'll just go out and do open rolling, and they may never get a chance to actually use those areas that they focused on during class. Or many of you might have areas of jiu-jitsu that you want to work on, but instead of getting a chance to work on it, you just full roll and see what happens, right? If we're trying to work on developing a particular area, we want time to work on that area. And so that situational rolling is so critical to making that happen. It gives you time to play around with the different techniques, to practice your ability to hold it, to develop that intuition, and develop the muscle memory. Because the muscle memory is important, because we're not going to be able to, during a hard roll against a good opponent, your opponent's not going to give you very long. You're not going to have these big windows of opportunities, right? You're going to have a fraction of a second to make a movement. And a lot of times it's not going to come from this thinking mind. You're going to almost notice it, and then you're just going to make something happen. Your body's going to probably be reacting slightly faster than what you can even see. This has been the case for me and a lot of people that I know, where we're in a position, we're rolling, let's say, at a competition, right? High stress level. And for me, I'll be attacking and using a technique, and it's like my body's recognized the opportunity, and I'm pulling the trigger on that movement and already doing it. And then all of a sudden, it's like I'm noticing it as it's happening. And this is because, again, I've developed a lot of muscle memory doing these positional drills and the different drills and everything else that I've done. And so those two together, drilling and then lots of situational rolling where you work in that position over and over again, those are critical to me. Those are two of the biggies that you can implement. And again, if your gym doesn't do this, then you have open mat time, and during your open mat time, you could say, hey, instead of just rolling full speed everywhere and just seeing what happens, say, hey, Bob, I'm trying to work on my back mount. Would you hop on my back, or would you let me take back mount on you, and we can practice there? And then when it's your turn, you could maybe do a position you want to focus on, and we can practice. There's a difference between exercise and practice. Exercise feels great, right? You get a good workout in, feels good. But practice is being very deliberate about what you're doing. That's practice. And a lot of times in jiu-jitsu gyms, it's fun to practice, it's fun to roll. It's not always fun to be deliberate with our training, because it cannot be it doesn't have as much variety. And sometimes if we're working on things like defense or whatever, it's not as fun, but it's very important. So those two together. Now, those two together gives you that muscle memory that then drives that if this then that approach into your nervous system, your body, your muscles, so that you don't have to think. Because as I said before, you're not going to have the opportunity to sit there and plan everything out. Sure, you can think strategically to some degree. And as you develop these positions, you will develop this ability to where all the stuff that you normally do, that you have to do to hold a position, becomes autopilot. You don't have to think about it. And then you have this ability then to be more flexible and strategic with your movements, because you can think on a higher level, because all the basic stuff to hold the positions on autopilot. But again, it has to be driven to muscle memory. Now, the last thing that I'll leave you with, because I know this video, we're at 9 minutes right now, so we're getting a little bit long, right? But hopefully this is useful to you. The last thing that I'll leave you with is that when it comes to finally doing all this stuff, you're only limited to a certain number of areas that you can really do this in. I'm not saying that you can't be good everywhere over the years, but more than likely you are going to have a specific few areas of competence, right? This is why if you look at competitors, we'll say like really good competitors as an example. If you look at them, they have very specific areas of competence, areas where they were trying to always bring their opponents into that area to beat them. My buddy Bernardo Faria, right? Everybody, I'm sure, knows him at this point. When he was competing, he was a guy that I watched a lot, because he was a heavyweight. And back when in 2013, when I first, or actually 2010, excuse me, when I first saw him compete, he was moving in a way not a lot of heavyweights did. He was playing bottom of guard and playing these positions. And again, he had a very systematic way. He would get people to his deep half guard. He would play there back then, and then he would get up and he would go for his over-under pass. And like those two areas of focus were his bread and butter. Now, he did other stuff, but those two were the workhorses of his game. And he would always try to pull people into those areas. You know, you look at Marcelo Garcia, he would get out in his butterfly guard and play those positions. And again, you can think about almost any competitor you want to. They all did this stuff. And so again, not to say that you're trying to be a competitor, because who cares if you're trying to compete? Learn the lessons from those competitors, those very skilled people. You want to take that approach, that very focused approach, and you want to direct it into a particular area of your game that you're trying to develop, and then really hunker down there for a number of years. And that's where you start to develop your style, your area of focus. That will then eventually become, you know, very trademarked to your game. And again, then you will have this beautiful mapped out sort of area of jiu-jitsu that you know like the back of your hand. You can't do that for everywhere, right? Jiu-jitsu, if you want to think about it, is it's like playing a video game where you create a character and you only get so many skill points. You only get so many skill points because, one, we don't have as much time as we'd like. None of us are getting younger. And again, as we get older, we can put in only so much time in training, right? So again, you have to be focused on it. And so what I would recommend to you, finally, leaving you with this, Dan, is that when you finally find an area that feels kind of good to you, you don't have to choose this like intentionally, like this is what I'm going to be good with. A lot of times we end up finding these areas and it's like, this feels like my spot. This feels very comfortable to me. We typically know this right out of the gate. Whenever that technique area comes along, that's where you then begin to sort of double down in that area and apply the things that I was talking about earlier in the video. So Dan, hopefully that helps you, brother. Thank you so much for the question. And guys, if anybody else is having that question, hopefully it's useful to you too. And I'll talk to you guys next time.